All right, as Dr. Evil would say, I'm on a frickin' roll today. Anyway, this is Yamabits Part 3. And what I'm going to show you is a little tip to help you when you're dealing with what I'm dealing with here, which is basically a big pile of Yamabits. And as part of the cleanup process, one of the things I did is, courtesy of my local thrift store, I got one of these Craftsman toolboxes. 2 drawers, big storage bay underneath, shelf on the top. What I'm going to do is, as you can see, I've already organized my swing arm and rear wheel parts that have been cleaned. I'll address the finish that you're seeing on the, for example, the wheel axle and these bolts. I'm going to address that when I actually get to assembling those particular parts. This is about organization, that dreaded O word. And one of my ideas that I had about this whole project is that I have to keep things under control because it's going to take a lot of time to do it. So I'm going to start right now. The second drawer is going to house, I'm going to switch hands here because I'm putting a rubber glove on because a lot of this stuff is still very cruddy. I'm going to be doing basically all the engine parts. Luckily, as you can see by this bag, that's the transmission in there. Okay, boom. Until it's ready to be restored, the transmission goes in there. Here you see I have the clutch baskets, and again I'll show the wear. You can see the grooving on those, how severely worn that is, especially that inner basket. But you notice also there's the bearing, the bushing, the nut, the 2 different shim washers. Yamaha drives me crazy with that, honestly, because most manufacturers do, because when you look up the part number for these 2 washers, and they're supposedly 2 different part numbers. At least they used to be. These look identical to me right now. I'd have to mic them to tell the difference. But on my old 90 YZ 125, these 2 washers were different thicknesses, and you had to put them in the right place. If you did not, your clutch would disintegrate because of it. But anyway, to digress, well, would you look at that? There's the clutch actuator. There's the actuator. As you can see, all this stuff needs to be cleaned. Now, again, I bring up a very interesting point. This is my bike, a 2001, is a 5NY. Notice what the inside of the cover says, 4JY. Again, a lot of times the casings, covers, really didn't vary that much from one year to the next. Okay, in here, this looks like, what is that? Oh, water. I see the water pump in there for one thing. I see the impeller for the water pump in there. But I also see what looks like the governor linkage for the power valves. Let's see, what have I got in here? Okay, nope, here's the governor for the power valves, it looks like. Is that it? It's hard to tell with the lighting here. Yeah, that could very well be. Anyway, again, the engine is a whole separate ball game. Here's the Kickstarter assembly, complete with insects. Again, all these parts still need to be addressed. These need to be cleaned. For these parts, they're going to get a washing. I do have a parts tank, by the way, for those who are going to rag on me about okay, this is bolts. Looks like the assembly bolts for the engine. Here we go. Here's the power valve governor right here. That's this nifty little gadget right there. Okay, so that's going to go in there. A rusted, oh boy, I hope I can get that gear. I think that's part of the Kickstarter, if I remember right. Various clips and bits and bobs here. You can see different washers. Yeah, I think that's part of the Kickstarter assembly. This is part of the shifter. You may recognize that. That's the actual shift shaft. And then there's part of the linkage that goes to the drum. There's the seal. Okay, so that's part of the tranny. So let's put that kind of with the tranny parts up there. Oil filler cap. Nice little accessory here. Here's a bushing of unknown vintage at the moment. Unknown parentage. Exhaust mount. The stator, another very critical part not to lose. Notice that one is a 4SS series. 4SR on the back plate. So yeah, some of this stuff does vary. Of course, the flywheel, you can tell because it's got a magnetic attraction to just about everything in here. Flywheel in there with the stator. And a bunch of engine bolts. I'm sure all this miscellaneous bolts and stuff in here. These are part of the engine. So I'm just going to gather all this stuff up for right now. again, the idea is get this stuff together in one location for now. Again, these parts need to be cleaned. Bunch of snap rings. Snap rings are one of those things. These guys, ignore the bolt in my hand. The snap rings are always a subject of debate with a lot of people. Some people say they're fine to reuse as long as they aren't stretched or distorted. Other people say change them every single time. There's a part that I really don't think belongs with the bike, but again, seeing as I got this thing in a million little pieces, and until I start putting the pieces together, everything stays intact. More bolts. I'm pretty sure that entire stack there is the bolts to put the motor together. Couple more bolts, and this appears, well, that I thought that was the oil drain plug, but it looks too long, and it's not the, I don't think it's the right thread dimensions to be the oil drain plug. That may still be in the bottom half of the cases. Anyway, so as you can see, I just eliminated a nasty box full of parts. And the parts that I've already cleaned over here. So now I got to take the glove off. Okay, these parts which are already clean get to join the engine drawer. So there's parts that are already cleaned and ready. The rest of these parts need to see the pressure washer, or not the pressure washer, the solvent tank, and get cleaned up. I've got the carburetor right here. Of course, it goes without saying that that is going to get a full tear down, cleaning, and rebuild. It needs a new throttle cable. As you can see, the throttle cable is all jacked up. But anyway, yeah, organization is very important. You know, make sure you develop or have a space to put everything while you're trying to put a project bike like this together. Have it all centralized so that way you can know where everything's at. You know, again, the majority of these parts, virtually every one of these parts, including all that hardware, should all be engine related. And putting these all in this drawer, since the engine is the later stage of the restoration, that'll keep them out of the way. This top drawer is going to get all the parts that are going to be in progress. You know, basically all the fasteners, all the rebuild kits stacked up over there. Basically, I'm just trying to get all this stuff off the floor and somewhat organized to the point that I can work without losing pieces and without somebody, hey you, without somebody getting into them, because he loves exploring parts and bits and bobs. There's the shock absorber. That's going to be a relatively easy quote-unquote rebuild. There's really not a lot to it. I've been debating on whether or not to send my shock and forks off to somebody like Pro Circuit, have them revalved for my specifications. I really got to see how the money flow goes on getting this whole bike together. Again, this motor is going to be a huge, huge project, because as you can see, I've got the cases on the ground there. And I think I've mentioned already, if I haven't, that things like the reed valve, the intake boot, by the way, the intake boot is another unobtainable part. It's the part that goes between the reed cage and the carburetor. I do have the complete airbox assembly, thank God. I was worried about this boot, the big intake snorkel missing, but luckily it's all here. As you can see, this thing needs a major cleaning as well. Frame, of course, is a rusted mess. It needs cleaning. The wheels are something that I've been thinking about extensively. I am not going to bother relacing those original rims. I am going to go ahead and buy some XL rims in blue. It's hella expensive. Between that and the spoke sets, we're talking about $600-700 for the pair. And by the way, that does not include the hubs. I have to use the OEM hubs for that. Thankfully, I've got those. But again, you know, it's a one-shot deal. As long as I don't grenade my wheels, they'll last me forever. But yeah, Yamabits Part 3. A little bit of tip on organization. Again, getting all these parts off the floor. I won't bore you with the rest of that process. Luckily, the space underneath should be big enough to hold all this plastic. And this way I can keep everything safe until I restore it. And, you know, in advance, about a couple weeks in advance of my planned restoration, I would go through each segment. For example, all these engine parts, I'd have to go open up those bags with the transmission parts in them and everything, make sure I've got everything I need. And if I'm missing anything, get it ordered so I can have it when I actually get to the stage of rebuilding the engine. Anyway, so organization is the key. It'll make the rebuild go a lot smoother, Using these little plastic bins to help organize parts for a given subassembly is another thing that will save you time and aggravation. I was going to save this for the rebuild part, but since I'm focusing on these linkages right now anyway, resist the temptation to powder coat those linkages. I was seriously thinking about it when I started cleaning them up, but I recalled back in the 90s I had a colleague, a friend of mine, who did that to his linkages. What people don't realize, even though when you put these together in the bike, you see they look sloppy and there's a lot of wiggle room and so forth. The linkages, the bearings specifically, and the spacers and everything are super critical in their spacing to keep the bike from being unstable and creating problems. If you powder coat those, and either the powder coating process distorts the linkages, or that couple thousandths extra thickness of the powder coat on, say, for example, these outer surfaces, which you can see are machined, they will create problems. At the least, you'll have a hell of a time putting the thing back together. At the worst, it'll cause binding in the linkage, and it'll make your suspension really suck eggs. So resist the temptation. If you want a fancy looking linkage, buy one. If it's not obtainable for your bike, like it isn't for mine, I can't get linkages for this bike anymore, I don't believe. It's like, oh well, I'll just have to have the stock linkage with the stock Yamaha gray on it and just be done with it. Anyway, that's it for this. That's it for Yamabits 3. 3 videos in one day, but hey, what the heck, we're on a roll.